My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverses. Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope. We're actually now past the original release date of the Black Widow movie, so under normal circumstances, we'd have actually talked about the first MCU movie of the year by now, but just the way things are, we're actually just getting to the first DC movie of the year instead. I swear that has nothing to do with my DC bias, that's just the way things worked out. BPR, you believe me, right?
I always believe you when you say things that I know for sure are true.
But does that mean you believe me right now?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we would be talking about a Marvel movie, clearly, if there was a Marvel movie to talk about, but there isn't. So it is the way it is.
We have once again with us in the podcast this week, Beef Pork Ribs' lovely fiance, Mljnoir.
Hello.
It's good to have you back on the show. You were last here to talk to us about Sonic the Hedgehog. What is one nerdy or geeky thing you've been doing during the quarantine?
Oh man, I've been working on a lot of cosplays because I've had a lot of time to like spend a day making a wig or like sewing a costume or whatever. That's been most of my day because I'm not working right now, so it's a lot of crafting and stuff.
I might have to consult you. I've been wanting to do a really good superhero costume for Halloween, and it seems like you would have the skills to make that a reality.
Maybe. I'm better at, my specialty is makeup, using makeup to make myself look like a man. I'm not super skilled with the actual costumes and stuff yet. I'm working on that part, but my specialty is more the wigs and makeup part. But I'm definitely down to be consultant. That is the word. Thank you.
Well, we'll talk about that later. But with us this week, we also have returning once again, Ben the Movie Buff.
Hey, how are you? Great to be back. And yeah, I love doing this. I love having something that feels like a routine because I don't know about you guys, but most of the other days kind of blend together. So it's nice to have something to do on Sunday afternoons. So pleasure to be here as always.
Now, you mentioned before we started recording that Birds of Prey, the movie we're talking about today, was the last film you saw in theaters before the pandemic.
That's correct.
And you also said that when we were watching it Friday, it was almost nostalgic for you.
It was, yeah. I think it's because I find I'm just a very sentimental guy, I suppose. So seeing the movie in theaters, I think it's when I saw it at the time, it was like a perfectly fine experience. And because my wife and I were going with my son, who at the time was, I guess, 7 months old, we went to a Stars and Strollers viewing of the movie, which means lights are not as dimmed, the volume is not as loud, and you can bring toddlers and kids. So it was basically a lot of moms and dads and their kids for this movie. But I think looking back on it now, because that was the last time I went to a movie this year, it does feel nostalgic for me because you know how it is, right? You don't know what you've got until it's gone. So yeah, it makes me feel a little nostalgic for going to the movies because I haven't gone in over 2 months now.
That just we were going to go see it in theaters, and we didn't get a chance. Because I built a cosplay of that particular version of Harley, and I was real excited to go see it. And we were waiting to see it till I got my cosplay finished, and then things started to get crazy, and we had to watch it like really sketchily online last night instead, and it was sad.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I guess I had some downtime before the next gig that I was going to work on, so I was kind of mildly interested in checking it out. But yeah, no, that's cool that you did a cosplay for it because yeah, there's definitely lots of fun, colorful costumes in the movie, especially sported by the titular character.
She forced herself into being the titular character. She's very loud in everything, especially her outfits. So it's a fun look to recreate, that's for sure.
Yeah, the reason why I say that though, Joe, is because with this movie, they initially like yes, the technical title is Birds of Prey and the whole fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn, but as the movie went on, because it wasn't that successful, there were a number of cases where they tried to kind of rename it a bit to make it seem like it was Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. So yeah, it's like I know what you mean. That yeah, they've the correct title is technically Birds of Prey, but it seems like it's changed a little bit since then.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. So, every time we talk about a comic book character or a comic book franchise for the first time on the show, we generally start by talking about how we were first introduced to the characters. So, because this is kind of about the Birds of Prey and Harley Quinn, I will allow some flexibility in your answers here. Everyone share about either your first experience with the Birds of Prey or your first experience of Harley Quinn.
Harley Quinn is very special to me. She's the first proper cosplay I ever did, and I cosplayed her. The first cosplay I ever did that was not to a convention was to go see Suicide Squad, and I did a more classic Harley um, inspired look, which I don't know how I got away with that because I did face paint, and I found out recently because I had been planning on doing that again to Birds of Prey, and I found out that you're not allowed to wear face paint to the theater because that's super sketch, and you could secretly, be someone dressing up as a Joker and all that stuff. Like they don't allow that anymore. I don't know if they were more chill about that at the time, but like I went in face paint to go see Suicide Squad, which was not worth the effort to dress up, but I did it anyway. So she's always been really important to me. She's one of my favorite DC characters. I've since I was a kid, and the Batman the Animated Series where she first appeared.
I arranged another early parole as soon as I heard about Gordon's testimonial. Pooh.
It is to laugh, huh, Mr. J?
I ask you, Harley, who's given more hours of amusement to the Gotham police force than me?
No one, Mr. J.
Yeah, I don't know. I love her. She's always been there for me.
If I can roll with that, I'll say that the Batman animated series from the 90s is definitely what introduced me to Harley Quinn. I didn't watch the show like all that faithfully, but like I'd catch episodes here and there, and I do remember once in a while coming across a character that I guess had I guess what you'd say like a very feminine jester outfit. So I do remember that design sticking out, and also the fact that just the way she talked, like she had this kind of vibe about herself where she talks in such a way that you know as a young guy like 10 or 11 years old, of course I'm like, who's this Harley Quinn character? I'm kind of interested. And then once in a while, like she'd do dangerous things, or of course kind of teaming up with the Joker. So she definitely had this kind of fun balance of she was like cute but crazy, I suppose. So that was definitely my first time um, meeting or discovering Harley Quinn.
For myself, my first introduction to Harley Quinn was actually the movie Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker, which I watched before I watched the animated series. I did not watch it when I was a kid. And she was in it, and so I don't know, from a rather young age, that's one of the first Batman things I saw, and well, from a rather young age. I still saw it when I was in high school, so I wasn't that young, but I kind of always had this idea that Harley Quinn existed.
Puddin' Company!
Hello there. Welcome to our happy home.
Where's Robin?
Robin? There's no Robin here.
Maybe he means our little Jay.
Of course! That's it!
No peeking. Mommy's little helper.
Because I only really got into comic books in university, so it was kind of she was part of like my general knowledge base of DC Comics and has been, I guess, ever since. I've since then read a few more of the comics that she's kind of in, but not any of her solo things. Same thing with the Birds of Prey. Like, I'm generally aware of who they are and where they come from, which makes the movie a little bit odd, but still. But I'm not necessarily like a big fan of theirs.
Well, like, yeah, I mean, I have a number of Harley Quinn comics, but that's an interesting point you made that, like, for me, I've never known a world without Harley Quinn, and I only found out, like, years and years later that she originated in the cartoon series. She wasn't a comic book character, but she did so well. She's always just been such a strong character, design-wise and character-wise, and something so fascinating about her that they folded her into the comics from the TV show. And she hasn't been around anywhere near as long as the Joker or Batman or a lot of those other characters, and yet she's climbed so high, like, so fast, and now she's, like, I'd say she's as well known as the Joker, and, like, yeah, she just really made a name for herself in a much shorter amount of time.
Just one point of correction there. I cringe anytime someone refers to Batman the Animated Series as a cartoon, just because I feel like it's a discredit to the quality of that show to call it a cartoon. So you're not the first person, Mjolnir, to make that mistake on the show. So and people who listen regularly would probably be waiting for me to respond. So there's my reaction there. Birds of Prey. I first heard about Birds of Prey actually through the live-action TV series. You guys might not know this, but in 2003, there was a very short-lived, like 12-episode TV show that aired on the WB called Birds of Prey.
Together, they have taken in Dinah, a metahuman herself, with powers that she is only beginning to explore. These three are the protectors of New Gotham, the Birds of Prey. My name is Alfred Pennyworth, and this is their story.
And I didn't watch the show, but I had a cousin who was like super into it, and I heard about it from him. And it was much like this movie, it was a kind of like a different take on the concept for Birds of Prey. So that was my first exposure to the Birds of Prey. And like everyone else here, yeah, Harley Quinn's first appearance was in the animated series in the 90s. And that was my first exposure to Batman and all things DC Comics. So naturally, it was my first exposure to Harley Quinn. And much like Mjolnir, like I don't know, like I wasn't into DC or Batman or any of this before Harley Quinn was around. So to me, like she's always been a part of it. And so when she did eventually get folded into the comic books, it just seemed natural. It's like, yeah, why wouldn't she be there? She's part of the other, Batman lore that I'm more familiar with at this point. The Birds of Prey, for everyone who's unaware, is a comic book superhero team that first debuted in 1996. They did a couple of one-shot kind of mini-series with the concept of Birds of Prey before turning into an ongoing series, which basically meant they kind of like gave it an audition to see if it would do well before it went into its regular series. And the comic book was originated by a writer named Chuck Dixon, who was very famous for doing a lot of Batman comics in the 90s. Essentially, the original premise of Birds of Prey is that Barbara Gordon, who most people might know as Batgirl, or the first Batgirl, or the daughter of Commissioner Gordon, she had undergone a traumatic event in the comic books where she had been shot by the Joker in the spine and became paraplegic. And so it became impossible for her to continue being Batgirl. And what DC Comics decided to do is turn her into an information hacker, kind of a online superhero kind of thing. They turned her into like an kind of central hub of communications and information for other superheroes. And so I think they did a really good thing. They rebranded her as Oracle, and they kind of helped her emerge from the tragedy of being shot and brought her into the world as like a whole new character. And so the original concept for Birds of Prey is that Barbara Gordon, being the information expert she is, she can't go out in the field. And so she started the Birds of Prey as a way of essentially having a field of field operatives that she could send out on missions that perhaps would fall outside of Batman's radar. And so it originally started with Oracle, Barbara Gordon, and Black Canary. Black Canary was a superhero in DC Comics who had a lot of fighting skills. She had some superpowers, and they had a really good dynamic going on. And then later on, they added Huntress, another character from the world of Batman who did not have superpowers. And it became a really good group of the three of them being female superheroes kind of working together. And that's kind of like what the Birds of Prey became famous for, as being a female-led superhero team.
I just want to say, like, Black Canary is, like, she's probably, after Harley Quinn, is the character that I'm most familiar with. I think I believe in this movie, it's a different, it's like supposed to be, is it the daughter of the original Black Canary or something like that? But it's like, I don't know, she was always a bit of a bigger name at least. The thing I knew her from when I was a kid was like, oh, she's like Green Arrow's girlfriend, I think, which is like, that's sad. That's how I knew her. But like, she's got, she's always kind of sassy and talk back and stuff. She's got a really good, there's a point at which she has a really good conversation with Harley in the comics that's really good too. So like, I feel like they do have some association there. But I think the reason this whole Harley Quinn thing took over is because they chose like really obscure characters for this, and then also they left Barbara out of it, which she is a bigger name. Like, you'd think if they needed to have a name to hang it on, that they'd choose Barbara for that, right? Not Harley Quinn.
The only thing also with that, I don't know if maybe the reception of the Killer Joke animated movie, and more particularly the part that Barbara Gordon was in, may have played a role in that. I don't know.
Yeah, so Mjolnir is a great way for us to transition talking about how the movie came to be. Apparently, back in 2015, when Margot Robbie was kind of negotiating to enter the DC movie universe as Harley Quinn for Suicide Squad, she also pitched the idea for a Harley Quinn movie. Naturally, of course, she was getting to the point of her career where she was trying to do more producing, so she's trying to create more work for herself. And she's openly said to being a fan of the Harley Quinn character. So in 2015, she pitched to Warner Brothers the idea of an R-rated girl gang film that included Harley, because she was of the opinion that Harley needs friends. She said, Harley loves interacting with people, so don't ever make her do a standalone film. And so I guess there were a lot of different Harley Quinn movie ideas being tossed around, and Birds of Prey became one of those. And Barbara Gordon was actually originally going to be in Birds of Prey, but they then announced a Batgirl movie, which has yet to go anywhere development-wise. But because she was going to be in a solo movie, they removed her from Birds of Prey because she was meant to be introduced there. And also, the main villain of the movie was supposed to be the Penguin, but then it was decided that the Penguin is going to be introduced in The Batman, which, again, back in 2016 was like meant to be coming out way earlier than it will. So they replaced him with a different character we'll talk about.
That's a good point. Like, I agree. Harley should not be by herself. As someone, I own a couple of Harley solo comics, and it's a little like when she's by herself, I don't know, she needs someone to bounce her craziness off of, and to like, she needs someone to either like be crazy with or to like be crazy despite of. Her by herself, it can be a bit much, I feel. So she needs friends. She's also a very social person in general, but Birds of Prey was a weird one for them to mix her in with. Like, they have Gotham City Sirens, which I think probably has more name recognition than Birds of Prey does. Like, that makes more sense to me. That's something she's a very big part of. They should have just thrown her in with the Sirens.
Yeah, so let's test this out. Ben the Movie Buff, have you heard of Gotham City Sirens before?
To be honest, I'm going to guess no. I probably have not.
Yeah, so the layperson does not know what Gotham City Sirens are, but you know who Catwoman is, right?
Oh, absolutely. Meow.
You know who Poison Ivy is, right?
I do, from Batman and Robin, one of my favorite films ever. Just kidding.
So that's Gotham City Sirens. It's Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and Harley Quinn.
Oh, okay. That's pretty cool.
Quick side note, I will forever stand by Uma Thurman's Poison Ivy. Yes, it was a terrible movie, but she was great in it. Same thing with Arnold Schwarzenegger in that movie. They were great performances in a bad movie.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that movie is awful, but I still have fun watching it, and I do have fun watching the bad guys do their thing. So, yeah, no, I hear you, BPR.
So Mjolnir, you're absolutely right. They should have, if they were going to do a movie with Harley and other female characters, they should have made Gotham City Sirens because, as we're going to talk about, the fact, and you alluded to this too, Ben, the fact that it was originally meant to be a Birds of Prey movie that Harley Quinn was kind of a guest star in, but even with the marketing, they had to shift the title to calling it Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. So that's all going to play into like why this movie is what it is. When the critics got a hold of this movie, it got, I would say, decentish reviews. 78% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 78% from audiences. So that would suggest that for once in, I don't know, forever, critics and audiences had a similar gauge of the movie. But I don't know, generally audiences are more favorable towards movies. So the fact that the two scores are actually matched, that would suggest that generally audiences actually had a less favorable impression of the film.
I think that's very interesting because it's normally you either please one or the other more. I'm surprised critics would rate it so highly unless it's like in comparison to other DC movies, because like I did like it and it had a certain style, like it was very stylistic. They were clearly going for a very specific feel and look, and like kind of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, like fourth wall breaking and stuff. They're kind of making her Lady Deadpool a little bit. So I don't know if maybe the critics liked that. Like, at least it had a consistent tone, I guess, which is nice. But that is weird. I feel like they're normally a lot more of a difference.
I think the thing we have to keep in mind, because I spend a fair amount of time on Rotten Tomatoes as well, is that if the number says 78%, that it would be interesting to like take some time and go through the reviews, right? Because sometimes you find on critically well-received movies that you'll find a lot of the same reviews that are just glowing, right? That they didn't just like the movie, they loved the movie. And I think it's quite possible that some of the reviews for Birds of Prey could very well be reviews where they didn't love the movie, but they didn't hate it either, right? As long as it sounded a little more on the favorable side, that like I still had some fun, it was all right. For Rotten Tomatoes, it has to either be a rotten review, or it has to be a positive, a fresh review. So I think the 78% could be indicative of that, of the fact that maybe that doesn't mean that 78% of critics loved the movie, but it means at the very least most of them somewhat liked it.
And unfortunately, box office wise, it came at the first weekend in February. It only made $33 million. Which, if you think about Suicide Squad, the movie that this version of Harley Quinn debuted in, it made $133 million its opening weekend. And people will say Birds of Prey is R-rated. Well, it's like, well, the Deadpool movies and Logan were both R-rated, and they made way more than 33 million. And I would like to think that at that point in early February, people like everything with COVID-19 wasn't so intense that people were like afraid to go to the movies. Like we gave Onward a pass for that, but I don't know if we could give that same pass to Birds of Prey.
Yeah, I think the thing we have to remember is that with a lot of comic book superhero movies, that for the most part, because we are still kind of in this phase where people will flock to the theaters to see these movies, that, yeah, 33 million is maybe for like a low budget horror movie or another kind of film that's maybe independent or whatnot. 33 million would be a really great opening, but especially for a character as recognizable like Harley Quinn and the fact that the DCEU has been established for some time now, yeah, you would hope that the movie could make a bit more money in its opening weekend. But yeah, 33 million is a bit of a disappointment.
But the DCEU has been established badly. Like, it doesn't know favors being associated with that because it's kind of known for not having the greatest movies. And yeah, I don't like. I'm a comic book movie fan. I tend to like most of them that come out, so I'm a huge fan of it taking over a bit right now. But also, I kind of want us to get to the point where it's just that's another type of movie that we all know, and like I just want to get to the point where it's like, oh, it did well because it's a comic book movie isn't a thing. It's just another genre of movie. Like horror movies come out all the time, and it's there for certain people, and not to be expected that it'll do really well or not just because it's like I just want it to be its own genre accepted, not just be like, oh well, we're just waiting for this phase to pass.
Yeah, so I read an interesting statistic shortly after Birds of Prey came out where they had, I guess, somehow figured out the average age of theater goers that went to see Suicide Squad. Now, if we remember Suicide Squad, I think made over $330 million back in 2016, and they found that the majority of people that saw Suicide Squad were actually younger people. So someone was thinking that Birds of Prey, the reason why it might not have opened as high as it should have was that with the R rating, it means that a lot of the younger people like can't go unless they have someone old enough to bring them to an R-rated movie, right? Because Suicide Squad was rated PG-13, so it meant that like basically anyone could go see this movie. Then you have Harley Quinn coming back in an R-rated movie, but this time around you have to be of age or know someone of age that can get you into the theater to see it. So I think they were mentioning that that could have also been a contributing factor.
The other thing, and I think this is Ben's definitely onto something because I mean Harley Quinn definitely does have a younger following. I mean Mjolnir's little sister actually loves the character, and there are, and it's not like when Deadpool did it. Deadpool is a character that really is meant to be in an R-rated movie. Not that he couldn't be in a PG-13 movie, but it's kind of like what the character always has been. Whereas like Harley Quinn has kind of, well, I mean, she started in Batman the Animated Series. That was definitely not an R-rated show, right? It was a very adult show in a lot of way, but it wasn't R-rated. So the fact that this happens kind of hurt it a bit. The other thing I was gonna say is kind of on the subject of Birds of Prey being slightly more obscure. I know a number of people have started making the comparison between it and Guardians of the Galaxy. Um, the big problem I find with that is that I remember like when the MCU was kind of developing their movies, they still had enough of a difference between the movies that you were like excited, like, oh, this is the James Gunn movie, this is the Taika Waititi movie, even though they're all part of the same universe. I feel like the same thing doesn't really apply to the DCEU. It's just kind of like, oh, it's another DC movie, and they kind of get less, uptight or less bothered about it, who was in charge of it, and they're more like, oh yeah, it's just DC, so it kind of gets a discredit that way a little bit.
And I would say to this movie's detriment, right now there's a Harley Quinn animated series, which is airing in the States on DC Universe, the streaming service that we can't get in Canada. And it's airing on like some Adult Swim cable channel here in Canada. If you really want to go find it, you can also just buy it online. Anyway, I think it actually does this movie discredit because it actually is very much R-rated itself. It's got adult language, adult themes, and it's also violent. So it is like there is another version of Harley Quinn out there right now that is R-rated and more mature and more adult. And it also plays into this idea that Harley works better when she has a group around her, because in that she has like a little team that works with her and play off of her in every episode. So I think it's kind of unfortunate that just like DC's approach to media is to allow the individual creators to do their own thing. So it's less homogenous and less of the same than Marvel is doing right now. It allows each person working on their different movie or different show more creative freedom. But at the end of the day, it's also leading to these wildly different versions of the characters, or maybe one version that is actually received really well and one that isn't doing as well. So all that to say, let's actually get talking about the movie. Beef Pork Ribs, give us the Blu-ray case description of this movie.
Are we ready? Sure. It's time for Gotham to meet the birds of prey.
I own Gotham.
He's building an army. Unless we all want to die, we're gonna have to work together. Hi, boys.
I thought she was just a pretty face.
Nothing gets a guy's attention like violence. Yes.
Birds of Prey and Harley Quinn.
Toss that for me, will you?
Rated R. Experience it in IMAX.
Harley Quinn and the Joker have broken up, and other things are also happening that she somehow gets involved in, and also the Birds of Prey.
This film is directed by Kathy Yan, and she's like receiving, I guess, the esteem of being the first Asian American woman to direct a superhero movie. As far as her style of direction goes, like I looked at her filmography, she has only like directed one other film that I didn't recognize. But I will say, like in the way that the movie shot and put together, it did sort of feel different. Like it felt unique, and so I'll definitely give her props for her direction.
Yeah, I think that the feel of the movie and like the performances she got out of the actors and actresses, and like that wasn't bad. I think maybe you have something to say about the fight scenes. I didn't notice as much, but like other than the fight scenes, I think it was pretty well put together.
And the movie is written by Christina Hodson, who I didn't recognize till I looked her up, but she wrote the Bumblebee movie, the live-action Transformers Bumblebee movie that came out a few years ago. And I remember really enjoying that and actually enjoying the writing. But this time around with Birds of Prey, there were moments that made me laugh, but the way in which they decided to tell the story, I felt was like unnecessarily complicated, and we won't get into that until we get to spoilers. But just to say, I wasn't super impressed with the writing, and I'm not trying to pick on Christina when I say that. Beef Pork Ribs, you kind of mentioned Harley's status as a kind of an insert female Deadpool. And so for people who would enjoy Deadpool as a character and enjoyed his movies, you would come and watch Birds of Prey and you would think to yourself, she's just doing her version of Deadpool. And I don't want to put that all on this movie, because a lot of the not even Birds of Prey, a lot of the Harley Quinn comic books that have been made in the past 4 or 5 years have kind of done that anyway. They've kind of taken her down the route of basically being DC's answer to Deadpool, which it's a good and a bad thing, because it's trying to get her away from being just associated as like the Joker's girlfriend who's abused all the time, and trying to like make her her own character within DC Comics. But at the same time, it feels kind of weird that she's been shoved into this corner where she's just the girl version of Deadpool for DC. And Mjolnir, since you've actually read her solo comics, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. So I'd have to go look at my comic book shelf to see what run it is or whatever. But it's you see her stuffed beaver that appears in the movie. So I have the first couple volumes of the storyline where that is introduced as something. And once again, that's the type of thing where she just doesn't work well on her own. So they literally like invented this stuffed beaver that she talks to and in her mind it talks back to her so that she can have like a back and forth quips with someone even when she's alone. That's their way of showing her thought process, I guess. And he's kind of like a conscience sometimes and sometimes not. But it is, yeah, those comics were they're very like breaking the fourth wall heavy. They're very tongue in cheek. There's a lot of hilarious like references to things where you're like, I see what you're doing here. You know you're in a comic book. And I think there's even like a storyline where she like goes to there's like a part where she goes to a convention and like ambushes the comic book writer or something like that and talks to him. Like and they have in that storyline, she's a big comics nerd. It's great. Like the Joker blows up like her storage unit, and she's like, "No, my comic book. It's wonderful." She's definitely. It's not just this. It's not like they looked at Deadpool and were like, "We're gonna do that because that was successful." It has been. It's been a part of her character for the last couple of years, I think. But I guess we'll talk about this later. I guess part of the way the movie was put together is also very reminiscent of Deadpool. So it's just like they needed to find a more unique way to break the fourth wall, I think, to make it more her own, because there's a lot of different ways to do that, and not just be, oh, instead of being the girl version of Joker, now she's the girl version of Deadpool.
Ben the Movie Buff, as the layperson of this episode, when you were watching Birds of Prey, did you feel like you were watching a Deadpool ripoff?
It's funny you mention that because I had never made the connection before. Once we started talking about it here in the last 5 minutes or so, I'm starting to see more similarities. But I do think that, yeah, I think there are enough differences, you know? Like, I feel like, I've seen Deadpool in 2 movies, I've seen Harley Quinn in 2 movies, and I think Birds of Prey, while there are definitely some things that are reminiscent of Deadpool's style, that I think Harley Quinn is just kind of in different circumstances, right? I mean, I feel like one of the characteristics about both Deadpool movies is that there's actually a fair amount of romance. But then in Birds of Prey, I feel like they make it pretty clear how, Harley Quinn's like the Joker and me, we broke up, and now she's going to be kind of independent and work with the Birds of Prey. So to be honest, I hadn't thought about that connection until 5 minutes ago when it was first brought up.
I have in my notes here to talk about the R rating. I don't think this movie needed it. I've watched the Harley Quinn animated series that is R rated, and I think that show, it's mostly funny, but then I find some of the R-rated elements take things like too extreme, and maybe because that's animated, it feels even more outrageous to see like someone's head blow up in animation than it would be to see it in live action. But there was nothing when I was watching the film was like, yeah, like there should be this many F-bombs, or yeah, there should be this many like creepy moments. I just didn't think it was necessary.
I agree. I think Harley is an interesting character. She has a lot of very mature themes. Even just the fact that her entire character is based around like domestic abuse and like toxic relationships and stuff. She has a lot of very intense themes like that, but you don't have to like you shouldn't. Yeah, she's not like a G-rated character, but there are ways you can do it justice without being vulgar.
Yeah, when I was thinking about how I felt about the movie after I had first seen it, whether there was an aspect that I liked or did not like about the movie, very little of my opinion had anything to do with the R rating, which kind of makes me wonder, like, was it absolutely necessary to give it the R rating? And I think on hindsight, I don't think it was. I think you could have trimmed some language and trimmed a few of the graphic shots here and there, and I think you basically would have still had the same movie, but PG-13 level.
I agree with that, and I think especially on the swearing side of thing, like I know we talked about it a little bit, but again, if you kind of compare it with Deadpool, like there were good reasons and character reasons why Deadpool himself swore a lot, but what I found is that actually it wasn't Harley Quinn who was swearing in this movie. It was other characters, some of which it made a bit more sense, but it wasn't necessary. Like if Montoya was swearing more, then I'm okay with that. But it was mostly I forgot, the little girl like ended up being the one who swore probably the most, and so it was kind of it almost felt like they were trying too hard at moments. I found on that point.
Of course, you forgot her name. They referred to her as Kid for most of the movie, but I think her name's Cassie. But also, the thing is, yeah, like even we talked about Batman the Animated Series, and that show, like she is like they have enough hints there, like she and Joker are sleeping together. She's teetering on the edge of being child appropriate for most of that show, but like it still works, and she still didn't feel out of place in that universe. Like her origins have always been like kid, like tolerably kid friendly, but like on the edge of something darker. So I think she, in a way, like she works better. I think when she's more accessible.
Yeah, to me, this felt like a superhero movie from the early 2000s, like as if it was one of the first X-Men movies where all the characters have like the names of the characters from the comics, and they might have some of the visual cues that would make you think of that character, but the personality isn't quite there. The costumes are certainly not there, and some of the more wild and crazy parts of the story aren't quite there. It felt, and for a movie coming out in 2020, when we've gotten to the point where superhero and comic book movies are fully immersed in all of everything from accurate looking costumes, full on stories, like great adaptations of the characters' origins. To me, this particular movie felt like a step backwards to say like, oh, like we're gonna shy away from showing Black Canary or Huntress in their comic book costumes because that would be just too weird. Even though this movie has Harley Quinn running around Gotham City dressed in all kinds of extravagant outfits.
Yeah, when I was watching this movie, I definitely kind of had that thought of um, as you go through the various story beats and you meet the characters and you see the way that Harley Quinn kind of tells the story by kind of introducing a character and going down a route and then saying, oh, wait, let's back up and let's go over here and do this, and the way it feels kind of disorganized. It definitely feels like a kind of movie that I can see where they were trying to go, and I could see a movie like this potentially being good, but I do think that the execution was okay at best. By no means is this a bad movie, but you definitely kind of hope that maybe they would have made some different decisions to make it a little better, because yeah, I just felt that as you get deeper and deeper into the movie, you see the hope of how this could have been better, and I don't think that they quite had a home run with this one.
Yeah. I just want to say, as far as like, I see what you mean, Joe, about how just the look and stuff, and that, I mean, even like Huntress and stuff, like it's very like X-Men, like, oh, we're wearing like the dark outfits and this and that, and we're trying to look cool, and we're afraid, but DC has never, like, since the 70s, with like with the really crazy outfits, and like what Superman used to look like and stuff, like the more modern DC movies, I think, have never gotten to that point of accepting the silliness of the comic book origins that Marvel has. Like Marvel has gotten to a point now where they will do like pretty much comic accurate looks, and they've just accepted that it looks silly, and are very good at tweaking it enough to make it not look ridiculous, but staying really true to the character designs. DC hasn't had that. Like all their outfits have been like weird reimaginings, or like just like weirdly dark, and like you can, I don't know, heavy looking, and they've never been good at that, at translating the looks properly.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I would say maybe Aquaman, the movie, is the only exception to that because there are some very comic book accurate looks in that movie. But that is unfortunately the general feel that these DC movies have had. And part of I think what's keeping me from really enjoying this movie is because since I am a big DC fan, I know who all these characters are supposed to be. So, and we're going to talk about kind of a bunch of them in the spoilers, but there's a lot of these characters that I have to imagine this is just like an alternate version of the DC universe, because if I try to associate the character I saw in the film as the character they are in the comics, my brain will explode because it will not make sense. Having said that, I realize not everyone is as invested in DC Comics as I am, but before we move into spoilers, maybe for our listeners, if everyone can maybe mention who their favorite character was in the movie.
All right, I'll start. My favorite character in the movie was Huntress. There is a slight bias because I really like Mary Elizabeth Winstead as an actress, and I was getting massive Scott Pilgrim flashbacks of like Ramona in the like confident and a little bit mysterious but also kind of awkward. But she pulled it off really well. Also, I like just the origin she eventually got and how she worked out in the movie. That being said, again, like you said, compared to what Huntress should be, it was a little bit odd, but I think it worked in this movie better than some of the other reimaginings.
Yeah, I agree with BPR. I think Huntress is definitely my favorite. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I've seen in a whole bunch of movies, and I find she's a consistent actress. She's very good at what she does, and I like Huntress's backstory. I would have loved to see more with that, of course, but I understand that there's time constraints. If I had to pick a second favorite, it'd be Harley Quinn.
I mean, I have a Harley bias, so like, I kind of have to pick her. This is not by any means my favorite version of Harley, and I think some stuff was a little weird, the choices they decided to make. But I do still like that character is very important to me, and I think they still, definitely in this movie, better than Suicide Squad, they did hit enough beats of what makes that character special and great, and what appeals to so many people about her. But also a special shout out to Black Mask, because um, I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. I think he did a really good job of being an interesting and unique villain.
We're actually somewhat in agreement here because the two characters that stood out to me were Huntress for the reasons that have already been said, and Black Mask for the reasons that have already been said. So well done, team. We're now going into the spoiler verse where we're gonna have free reign to talk about spoiler things from the movie. And if you want to skip ahead, there will be a time code in the description, and I'll tell you where to skip towards our final thoughts. So here we go. Inside the spoiler verse. This movie's timeline was weird. They kept jumping back and forth to like 2 days ago, 4 days ago, a week ago, flashbacks to people's origins, and Harley's like the narrator, so she has more information than. And it's like, at one point in time is she narrating from because she knows Huntress's whole origin, but then like when she's first shown on screen, we don't know who she is. It raised many questions.
So for the kind of order of the movie, like I can see what they were going for, and the kind of having it in jumbled order, I think could have worked a lot better if it would have been done in a way, again, in a way that made it more a Birds of Prey movie instead of a Harley Quinn movie, because like almost in the I think almost if they would have tried to do what Into the Spider-Verse did, where they kind of had every character come back and tell the story again. That way, the events that were repeated were instead seen from a different point of view. Like you'd have the event happen once, and it was Harley telling it, and then you'd have Montoya tell it, because it was like she had a different information or was privy to different thing. Then Black Canary tells another part of it, and then Huntress really awkwardly tells one part of it, which would have also worked into having more character development for the non-Harley characters, and I think would have just made like I don't think it would have fixed the pacing and the timing of it. I think there were still issues, but I think it would have at least made it intentional and again made it work towards character development and towards it being a more cohesive movie.
Yeah, it was very Deadpool. Like that is exactly what they did in Deadpool. They started with a big action sequence and then went backwards and was like, oh, but then this, like, it jumps all over the place, and it just felt really Deadpool. And that's why I think, like, there was like one too many Deadpoolish elements that really stood out to me, and felt like you could have done this in a more unique way. And also just, yeah, that's the thing, is this was a Harley Quinn movie with a Birds of Prey origin tucked in there slightly. And yeah, one of the main things that made it more of a Harley Quinn movie, like feel aggressively Harley Quinn, was definitely that she was telling the story. I liked BPR's idea of maybe having more people telling the story, and then it maybe wouldn't feel like there's so much Harley in your face constantly, and that's coming from someone who likes her.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really interesting point because I think the theory, like the idea of Harley Quinn telling a story and it kind of being all over the place and like here's one part, but here's another part. We have to go back and forth. In theory, sounds like a fun idea, but yeah, I do think it didn't. I don't think I dug it as much as I would have liked to when I was watching the movie. And I think as BPR brought up, I think there could still be a different way um, to do basically the same idea, but using a different approach in order to, I guess, communicate it as best as possible to the audience.
So we got to talk about Batman and the Joker because they're referred to by name, but they never show up in the movie. And to me, I never felt like I got a good enough explanation as to why they didn't show up. Now, the whole point of stories like Birds of Prey is that there are other things going on in Gotham City that, Batman isn't involved in every little thing going on. And I would have appreciated like maybe like a throwaway line as to like why he wasn't there. Like I know why he's not there because they don't like the whole Robert Pattinson Ben Affleck Batman situation. I know legally that's why he's not in the movie. But even if they'd like written an explanation to say like Batman's off with the Justice League, or had maybe this movie could have been set during Justice League where he was outside of Gotham and doing other things. And with the Joker, it's even worse. It's like so much of the plot is rooted around the Joker and Harley breaking up, and the fact that Joker never makes his presence known, like the fact that she blows up the factory and makes that public statement, and we never even hear from him, it seemed kind of weird to me.
Yeah, I have a big problem with the Harley and Joker breakup being off screen. I understand that they want it to be about Harley, not about Harley and Joker, but like when the entire movie is spent talking about that breakup and this horrible thing, this horrible relationship they had, and that you just kind of have to be like, oh, I guess you just have to, like, obviously everyone knows who Harley Quinn is, but like I feel like they shouldn't expect people. They should have something in the movie to show that, or at least a flashback or something of like of why she fell in love with him and then what finally broke that. And the fact that Harley has always been so loyal to Joker and they've broken up, like they said, for real this time. We needed to see why it was for real this time because they've had fights before. She always comes back, or he always gets bored. Like we needed to see why this time was the final time for sure. Why she's so sure that now is the last time.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Mljnoir. I think it does feel a little less important when Harley Quinn just we hear her side of things and we just hear how things went from her perspective. I would have been very interested to see whether we could actually have a scene. And I mean, I obviously like when there's this question of, oh, why don't we see Batman? Why don't we see the Joker? Why don't we hear more about them? Obviously, like the reason why we don't see them is probably due to money, but I know like for story purpose, of course, I think it's just that kind of convenient thing that we sometimes see in other movies and TV shows where, yeah, sometimes like the most convenient thing is just to like write a quick throwaway line about why a certain person isn't there. But yeah, I would have been totally down with having the Joker even just there for a few minutes to kind of figure out why was this time the final time for the two of them.
And I understand that they're trying to separate themselves from Jared Leto's version of the Joker because everyone hated it, and also I think they've had a falling out with him also, so like he probably wouldn't even do it now because he's mad they cut out all his scenes or whatever in Suicide Squad. Like I understand that it's complicated because of the extenuating circumstances, but it's still your job as a movie to make this make sense in universe. And yes. Okay, and the thing is, a BPR was saying to me was that like why is the Joker not like why does Black Mask feel that now he has the chance to like take over stuff? Joker is still a thing. Just because he and Harley broke up doesn't mean he doesn't still rule Gotham or whatever, especially this version, which is a huge mob boss. Apparently, like that's what they kind of gave us in Suicide Squad. So like they didn't talk about that at all. You'd think if his ex-girlfriend is running around causing havoc and all this stuff is going on and people wanted this diamond, he'd be involved in some way. They didn't even mention why he wasn't involved.
And even if they didn't want to bring in Jared Leto, they had a part of the introduction which was in the weird, Teen Titan Go almost style of animation. They could have showed what happened for the breakup like that, and there, no Jared Leto.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I would have been very curious to see what that would have looked like. If I can bring something up, something that kind of bugged me about the movie that I wish they had done differently was, I think as we were talking earlier, there seems to be this kind of question of whether this is a Harley Quinn movie or a Birds of Prey movie, right? Because the title will lead us to believe that it's a Birds of Prey movie, but then as time went on, they kind of called it like, oh, Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. So I think for me, something that kind of bugged me was that when the actual gang gets together, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure like it's in the last 35 minutes of the movie. So we go through most of the movie without seeing all the characters together. We see like pairings, right? They kind of do the same thing that Expendables did. And that bugged me about Expendables was that with Expendables, you set up this idea of like, hey, here are all these big, huge action stars, and we're going to get a whole bunch of them together for a big action movie. And I thought, like, that's a really fun idea. But most of Expendables is like, oh, Sylvester Stallone and Jason Statham going on a mission and doing this. And then Jet Li and Dolph Lundgren are like two other guys doing this and that. And then finally, at the end, all the characters come together. And I do feel like if this is supposed to be a Birds of Prey movie, I would think that it would be nice to see all of the Birds of Prey team up a little bit sooner so we can get a little more time to see what they're like as a gang, because I think that's something that the first Avengers movie did very well. And obviously, a lot of the characters in the Avengers were established in other movies. But if you were just to watch the Avengers by themselves, the first like 30-45 minutes, we have our characters kind of like getting into their various places and whatnot. And then I'm pretty sure by like the hour mark, all of the Avengers are together and we get a chance to see what they are like and how they function as a team. Whereas with Birds of Prey, like we get that very quickly towards the end, and then they're like, well, let's join forces to fight the bad guys. And I just think it was a little too late for me.
Well, even another comparison could be drawn and proof that it can work without having an entire like 5 movies have set up beforehand. Guardians of the Galaxy, right? That is a great team movie. That is a movie that Suicide Squad tried to be and failed horribly. This movie also kind of tried to be it, but also they did enough different stuff. It wasn't as obvious of a ripoff, and they were more successful. Still didn't work quite as well as Guardians. And Guardians, Guardians is such a good movie because it really does have like their first action scene all together. It's in the prison when they're breaking out, and they're like pretty much all together from that point on, right? They introduce them a little bit, or they have they start with Peter, and you go from there, and then like all these people come around, and I think the part of the reason they took so long was because they were trying to build up the characters individually, which is a good idea, and it's good that they cared about that. But Guardians is proof that you can have the character development keep happening once they team up, or delve more into it in the second movie, because the second Guardians is a lot more character driven than plot driven. And you can still have strong characters, but not like separate them out. Like you can still be interacting with someone else and still have character development. Like you don't have to be by yourself.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to another sin of the movie is that, as we've said several times, it's not really a Birds of Prey movie. It's kind of like a movie where Harley Quinn interacts with different Birds of Prey adjacent characters, and then all of a sudden there's a reason for them to team up at the end. I mentioned in non-spoilers how it's hard for me to like see these characters as who they're supposed to be. Like Renee Montoya, this character in the movie that is played by Rosie Perez, I did not recognize her as Renee Montoya at all. Everyone who's familiar with the animated series would know Renee Montoya was actually introduced in that show as well, just like Harley Quinn, and she was a hardworking cop who became a detective. And at some point, she was introduced into the comic books, where she became one version of the Question, another DC character, but kind of like the salty, swear a lot, kind of like female cop who's under the gun of her male bosses. Like the character that's in this movie did not feel to me like Renee Montoya at all.
I actually was not aware that she became a version of the Question, but that actually does make a lot more sense. And the kind of person who might become the Question made a lot more sense than the person we had in this movie. Like, again, it more or less worked within the context, but less than more, I think. And also, even though they were kind of trying to work on her character, they didn't like they mentioned that she was a good cop. They mentioned that she got looked over, but it was a lot of like telling, not showing. Because when she actually comes into the action sequences, she's drunk or she's not doing very well, or she just randomly then towards the end is perfectly competent after not being great in the other one. And again, you're bringing in her physical abilities rather than her detective abilities, which, I mean, it's always been a problem, I think, for a very long time, even with Batman. Like, Batman is the greatest detective on Earth, and it's very seldom portrayed like that in a lot of movies. But there is an aspect of that you could do, and that you could have done. Like, you kind of have it in her first scene, but then it's dropped for the rest of the movie, the fact that she's a good detective. And I feel like it wouldn't have been that hard to make her deductive reasoning or her coping skills part of the plot, as opposed to just making her fight well.
Especially if, like you said, if they had them all take turns narrating, that'd be a real easy way to work the detective work in there.
So something I wanted to bring up that I actually really enjoyed about the movie was, and I think we have to remember that Birds of Prey obviously didn't have the $200 million budget that a lot of other comic book superhero movies might have, like in the case of some of the bigger DC movies or Marvel. But I got to say, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the action. So for me, I really like the chase earlier on, where you have all these different characters for different reasons trying to chase down Harley Quinn, and she's trying to remember like what she did to get them angry to be chasing after her. I also like the bit in the I guess like in the storage section of the prison, where Harley Quinn has a bat and she's using this baseball bat to take out enemies left, right, and center. And also the bit towards the end where the Birds of Prey do actually join forces, and they're in the kind of like fun house where certain characters are like bouncing on the trampolines and using various parts of the decor to their advantage to try and fight the bad guys. I think what kind of stood out is that this movie, I mean, clearly had enough of a budget to do all these different fight scenes, but for someone like me, like I really love a good action movie, and I love when action scenes are done in a really cool and controlled way, or in any kind of fun way where you can still basically follow what's going on. And I felt like there were enough beats in this movie where there were actually some really cool moves and some really fun ways that they played with these different scenarios of like, you're in this set, what can you do that can affect the action? Like you have a hammer, you have a baseball bat, you have all these different props. What can you use to make the most of the action? And I actually found myself kind of pleasantly surprised by some of the moments of action in this movie.
While I agree generally with what you said, I did find that most of the action sequences lasted just a bit too long and did not necessarily flow one into the other particularly well. I think mostly the final fight scene, which I get was supposed to like show off all the characters and what they can do together. And there were definitely some really cool action shots and some good use of the sets for that scene. But then it went on for a while and wasn't necessarily like it was cutting between the characters, but not showing off again that much of their actual character. Like Huntress and Harley a little bit more, but Montoya and Black Canary, until Black Canary actually used her powers, were just there kicking and punching and not really doing much else, which I think did their characters a disservice and kind of dragged on the fight scene a little bit, and definitely the fight scene in the in the police precinct and in the evidence room afterwards. Definitely it was cool, it was original, but it went on and went straight into there's still somebody chasing us in the car, so throw the stick of dynamite at them, which just seemed like a bit too much to me.
Also, the funhouse fight, I don't know, it was lit weird. It was so dark, I could barely see what was going on, and the lights came from weird. I get that it was a funhouse and the point was to be like kooky and off center, but they could have made it a little clearer what was happening because I found that really distracting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great example of how to do a funhouse really well in the all the action sequences that happen in the Hall of Mirrors. I'm thinking right now, the Man with the Golden Gun, like the little training ground that Scaramanga has, in which he fights both Fawn and the assassin at the beginning. But in that one, it was clear where things were happening, why things were happening, and it wasn't like just a bunch of faceless people, which I think kind of added to literally faceless. They were wearing all the masks that.
It was so dumb.
Yeah, it was a strange way to do it. And I still agree there were a lot of good things in the fight scene, but I think it could have been polished a little bit more, and that would have given a bit more time for other more important maybe plot points to actually happen.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I mean, yeah, just to clarify, yeah, it's not that, every single action scene in this movie is amazing. I guess there were enough moments where certain moves or certain things would happen, and I found myself thinking like, oh, that was pretty cool. Hey, that was pretty cool as well. And yeah, even I think if there was one piece of action that that I found the least interesting is when she initially goes into the precinct and is like shooting like the glitter and shooting the fun bags and whatnot at people. But for me, yeah, once she gets into the evidence room, like that's where I actually thought a lot of the moves she did with the baseball bat were really cool. So that's fair. Yeah, and definitely not perfect action, but like there are enough moments that kind of surprised me that I thought they were done quite well.
I did appreciate that. I appreciated that they made an effort to be unique in their set pieces and in their action. Like you could tell they were trying to have new places to have this, and the way Harley broke into the police station. Like they were trying to be unique with it and put their own spin on things, because I feel like a lot of, even a complaint of a lot of the Marvel Netflix series is that, oh look, it's another fight in a dark hallway with ninjas. Like it was just a lot of the same type of action, and a lot in the same places. So to their credit, they tried to be unique with it. I just think some of it, yeah, they could have, it could have been done a bit better.
I mentioned again in non-spoilers the characters, and another character that I feel like was really treated poorly in this movie was Cassandra Cain. The little, as Mjolnir pointed out, like half the time they just call her the kid or the little girl. In the comic books, Cassandra Cain is the daughter of an assassin who seems like she's mute because she doesn't speak. She learns how to fight, and she actually has a metahuman power where she basically, once she sees a fighting technique used in front of her, she knows how to do it. And so she's trained to be an assassin. By the time she's a young adult, she is considered one of the most skilled hand-to-hand combatants in the entire DC universe. And she goes on to become one version of Batgirl. and she actually was the first Batgirl to have her own ongoing solo comic book series. And so to see Cassandra's name used for this like little foul-mouthed pickpocket kid who is at the center of the action in this movie, it was honestly like it felt like a huge disservice to me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think I've had that experience with some Marvel characters that they will sometimes the movies will take like lesser known characters that less people seem to care about, and then they will drastically rewrite the characters, and it's kind of like, yeah, like use the name just for like name recognition, even if it's not much, but just be like, oh look, now this character is like a fun little Easter egg, but then like it has nothing to do with the original character. And I know that can be very annoying. I definitely feel your pain there. And for me, like yeah, Renee Montoya and Cassie, they're both characters. Like as a comic books fan, I'm not like a huge DC fan. I'm more into Marvel, but like I definitely know both those names. Like those are names I'm aware of and like recognize. I don't have like a lot associated with them or know them personally, but like I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. And so they're clearly, it's one of those things, I guess. They're like, oh, we're going to get the comic book nerds and we're going to be like, see, we know your stuff. We know your obscure little characters. So like watch us because of this little Easter egg, but it cheapens it. And then like if you're just using the name for namesake, then you're doing disservice to a character that you can never properly portray now because you've already done that character.
I think it's also like for how for a while people who weren't comic fans just assumed that it was normal for Peter Parker to create web out of his body. It's the same thing. If you once you start going down a path, especially in a movie, it can be really hard to come back from it.
And it's weird because some of the characters in the movie, as far as how they're portrayed and their personality and their origins, they're actually very accurate. Like for the most part, Huntress, that's bang on Helena Bertinelli's story. Harley Quinn, that's more or less bang on how she's portrayed in the comic books right now. Black Mask, ignoring the fact that he wasn't actually wearing the black mask the whole time, and makes sense because you got to give Ewan McGregor screen time, and whatever, don't hire a named actor for a role like Black Mask, because literally the idea is the mask is supposed to be stuck to his face. Like that's why he wears. Anyway, but in how he portrayed the character, comics accurate. Even Victor Zsasz, a very obscure Batman villain, was in this movie, and he was portrayed very accurately. So it's a weird kind of contrast. It's like you get some characters really right, you clearly did your homework, and there's other ones where it's like, okay, you must have skipped that part of the lesson plan.
I will say though, as much as like there is, like you said, don't get a named actor. However, I would counterpoint. Hugo Weaving was V in V for Vendetta. It is possible to get very good acting and very good portrayals of characters even with a mask on. And I'd argue actually Ewan McGregor probably could have pulled it off because he does have a good voice and good mannerism, and he portrayed the character really well. And I do feel like he still would have been able to do it even with the mask on. Like I don't think that would have been necessarily a problem, or at least we could have gotten to the incident where the mask gets on him.
I think it's partly like we talked about earlier, like DC still has a fear of looking stupid, so they don't do the full looks. They don't commit, they don't make Killer Croc have a massive snout and actually look like a crocodile, like they don't believe in that stuff yet. They haven't learned, as Marvel has, to embrace the silliness of the comics. So they probably were just like, oh, he wears a mask all the time. That's dumb looking. Let's make him look like a normal human being, which is unfortunate. But I also don't know much about that character, and I don't know how accurate that character is to the comics. But I really liked his like real sassy, unhinged, like crazy. And I really liked the portrayal. I don't know if that's comic accurate, but I loved it.
From what I know of Black Mask, it's pretty on point. Like if anyone, there's a great animated Batman movie that he's in called Batman Under the Red Hood, and Black Mask has a large role in that movie. And yeah, he seems like very unhinged. Kind of like shoots his guys because they made one mistake, sort of thing. So it was, and that's the only complaint I have is that he just wasn't wearing the mask enough. So coming around to final thoughts, ultimately, this is not a Birds of Prey movie. So if you are one of those people out there who's actually a big fan of Birds of Prey, I would recommend you go and watch the new CW TV show Green Arrow and the Canaries that is coming out, because that is actually going to be much more in line with what Birds of Prey is than this movie. This movie is for people who like Harley Quinn and are interested in seeing what the world of Gotham City is like, because this movie does kind of capture the kind of wacky, crazy world that Gotham City is, where you have all these colorful characters kind of running the criminal empires and whatnot. And there are some great performances in here. There's some elements that are faithful to the comics and some that aren't. So you might enjoy it. That's the best I can say.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I would say that the movie is okay. It's not a bad movie. It's not a good movie. It's just okay. I think there's just enough to kind of like about it and to kind of get into it. I do wish that certain events regarding the team of the Birds of Prey happened a little sooner than they did, but I still managed to have some fun with some of the action that's in the movie. So it's okay.
I enjoyed it, but once again, I have a massive Harley Quinn bias. That being said, they made her more of a jerk in this movie than I feel like she generally is. I feel she gets on people's bad sides because she's not like super aware of other people sometimes, which they did portray here, but sometimes it just felt like she was straight up mean spirited, which I wasn't a huge fan of. But here's the thing: if it had just been a Harley Quinn movie, then that would have been fine. But I feel like, yeah, it's doing a disservice to Birds of Prey fans, because if you say the names of like all the other characters, like, and you have to say one word about them or like a couple words, what do you say? I would say like Black Canary has pretty hair, and I would say the kid. I remember the kid had like a pink cap on her arm and with a pickpocket, I guess. Like there's just and Renee Montoya looks tired. Like I literally like the first when you say those names of those characters, the first thing that comes to mind is not any character stuff. It is their looks. It's their character designs or like really like baseline stuff, which is really sad because they deserve more than that and they deserve more of the attention. And Harley Quinn is a more known character, so they could have done less with her and coasted on people knowing more about her and developed these characters more. Like the balance, if they were going to be unbalanced, it should have been in the other direction, not in Harley Quinn's favor.
And for myself, I think overall, I'll agree with the movie buff. It wasn't a bad movie. It wasn't a great movie. I think I would rate it as above average, because it did take some risks that some of which paid off. It definitely somehow still was more character driven than story driven, even though it probably should have been either more story driven or got given more to the characters. But it's still a solid movie, and I guess we're gonna get to ratings in a second. Mjolnir has one final thing.
Well, I liked it more than like I've liked any of the other DCU movies lately. Also, Zaz and Black Mask's relationship was so cute. Like, I don't know, they're crazy, fed off each other really well, and it was just like it was a really cute relationship.
I'll give Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn 2.7 out of 4 bat cookies.
I will give it, so on IMDb, I gave it a 6 out of 10. So I don't know exactly what that would equate to with bat cookies. I guess something like 2.5, 2.4 out of 4 bat jar cookies. I think that would be my rating.
I'll give it a 2.67 so that it's just above 2.5. So it's still, like, as much as I came out of it being like, oh, there were problems with it, in the moment I mostly enjoyed it.
I'll give it a 2.7 because I think I liked it more than you did.
So there you go. This film is already available for purchase and rental on streaming because of COVID-19. So if anything we have said has made you interested, go check it out. And we're not going to check the mail this week because we're running out of time.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
message us on Facebook or message us on Twitter at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast in whatever platform you listen to podcasts, including YouTube. Please give us a rating, write reviews for our shows, and share our posts on social media. This will help us to bring all people inside the Bat Jar.
For the first time in what seems like forever, we're actually going to pull a topic out of the Bat Jar to talk about next week's episode. Okay, I got the Bat Jar here. Okay. You guys can hear that? Got the jar. Pull out the blank paper. Just got the topics. There is still one comic book film that has come out this year we have yet to talk about, and it's just being released now on streaming. Bloodshot or Bloodsport or Blood something with Vin Diesel in it. But I'm like, why? You know, we can take our time. We got a good, you know, the next time a comic book film is supposed to come out is Wonder Woman in August, so we've got ourselves some time. And anyway, I'm delaying here, pulling things out of the jar. All right, here we go. All right, so here I pulled out Batman 66. So what that means is our next episode is going to be talking about the Batman television series from 1966.
Oh man, as I said earlier, I'm a sentimental person, and I have a big thing for nostalgia. I have a lot of nostalgia for Batman 66. That'll be fun.
I mostly remember that Colonel Klink from Hogan's Heroes had a cameo in one of the episodes.
That's the Adam West one, right? Yes? Okay. Yeah, I know which one that is. It's the dumb-looking one. But, I don't know a lot about it, the clips I've seen and stuff. It seems like it had a really good vibe. It was very fun.
Holy name drop, Batman!
There's a comic book series that's kind of continuing that timeline, and they introduced Harley Quinn into that universe, like within this comic run, like based on that TV show. I don't know anything more about that, but like it sounded really I don't know, like the fact that it did so well that people are like trying to recapture the magic of that show from like the 60s. There's a lot, I think.
Definitely. So I have the whole series on DVD, so I'm probably gonna find some time to rewatch a bunch of episodes, and you guys can feel free to enter into that as well. I might be switching between different voices by the time we're here next week. Who knows? We might need to like hire a narrator for next week's episode just to be in line with the 60s show.
Mm-hmm.
And in that spirit, we want to thank both Mljnoir and Ben the Movie Buff for being here this week. Is there any shout outs you guys want to leave to the world before we close?
If I may, my Ben the Movie Buff YouTube channel has had a bit of a resurgence in the last few weeks because of all this time I've had off. So if you guys, if anyone listening here is interested in videos about movies, like any kind of movie discussion, I would ask that you please subscribe to my channel. I've already done some videos, like recently I did a review of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, a movie I haven't seen for like 20 years, and I watched recently, and I did a review of it. I talked about the best movies I saw in the last 10 years in the 2010s decade. So I have lots of stuff coming up weekly, so if that's something that interests you, please check it out.
I am at Jubilee Cosplays on Instagram and TikTok. If you want to see weird, random, like geeky cosplays, then that's there. I cosplayed the Harley Quinn from this movie. I was super proud of it. I took like a really cheap $7 wig I bought from the thrift store and managed it to turn it into her hair, and was very impressed with myself. So yeah, I have fun there.
So come back to the Bat Jar podcast next week when we talk about Batman 1966. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm B4 Cribs.
I'm Mjolnir.
I'm Ben the Movie Buff.
Catch you on the flip side.
Insert thing here.
Are we supposed to have catchphrases? That's my catchphrase now.
See you in the next one.